Kira Velshan was having a terrible day, and she had no idea it was about to become the most important day of her entire life. The young Valexian girl sat alone in the corner of the academy library, her lavender fingers trembling over the public terminal screen, and her bioluminescent freckles flickered with stress as she tried to understand the words in front of her. She was only 16 years old, small even by Valexian standards, and her species was known across 12 star systems as peaceful scholars, who had not fought a single war in over 9,000 years. The Valaxians believed in knowledge, in diplomacy, and in the power of words over weapons, and Kira was the perfect example of her people. She loved studying alien biology, she enjoyed reading ancient texts, and she dreamed of one day becoming a professor at this very academy on the crystalline moon of Valarith 9. But right now, all she wanted was to submit her xenobiology homework before the deadline. The problem was simple, but frustrating beyond belief. The terminal interface was written entirely in Standard Terran, the language of the humans, and Kira had never been good at reading human words. The letters all looked the same to her, the grammar made no sense, and she had already failed 2 translation tests semester. She squinted at the screen, her large violet eyes struggling to make sense of what she was seeing. There were 2 buttons at the bottom of the screen, and they looked almost exactly alike. One button said, "Submit assignment," and the other button said, "Submit for assignment," and Kira had absolutely no idea what the difference was. She thought about asking someone for help, but the library was empty except for a sleeping Gloraxian in the far corner, and her communicator had died an hour ago. Her homework was due in exactly 3 minutes. Kira took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and pressed the button on the left. For a moment, nothing happened, and she felt a wave of relief wash over her tired body. Then the screen flashed bright red. A loud chime echoed through the quiet library, and the sleeping Gloraxian snorted awake in surprise. Words appeared on the screen in large, bold letters, and Kira felt her heart stop as she slowly read them out loud. "Volunteer registration complete," she whispered, her voice shaking with confusion and growing fear. More words appeared below. "Biometric scan confirmed. Citizenship verified. Age requirement met. Physical examination waived due to allied species status." Kira's freckles began to glow brighter, which always happened when she was scared, and right now she was very scared indeed. "Report to Human Expeditionary Force Vessel Steadfast Fury, Docking Bay 7. Departure time, 0600 hours. Failure to report will result in criminal charges under Galactic Union Military Code 7749. She stared at the screen in complete shock. This could not be happening. This had to be some kind of mistake. She pressed every button she could find, desperately searching for a cancel option or an undo command, but the system only beeped at her angrily each time. A new message appeared. Registration is final and binding. No cancellations permitted under wartime protocols. Thank you for your service to the Galactic Union. Kira wanted to scream, but her voice would not come out. She had just accidentally enlisted herself in the human military. She had just volunteered to fight in the war against the Krethval Dominion. The Krethval were monsters. Everyone knew that. And they had destroyed 17 entire species in the last 100 years alone. They were 8-legged nightmares with armor like black iron and mouths that split into 4 terrible mandibles. They did not take prisoners, they did not show mercy, and they certainly did not care about peaceful little Valaxian girls who pressed the wrong button. Kira finally found her voice and let out a small cry of despair. The Gloraxian across the library looked at her with annoyance before going back to sleep. She ran out of the library as fast as her legs could carry her, racing through the crystalline corridors of the academy toward the administrative building. Surely someone could fix this mistake. Surely the administrators would understand that she was just a student who did not speak good Terran. But the administrative office was closed for the night, and the emergency contact line put her on hold for 45 minutes before disconnecting. She tried calling her parents on Valaxia Prime, but interstellar communication was down for maintenance until morning. By the time the sun rose over the crystal spires of the academy, Kira had not slept at all. She had spent the entire night crying, pacing, and trying every possible way to contact someone who could help her. Nothing worked. At exactly 0545 hours, two human soldiers in crisp black uniforms appeared at her dormitory door. They were tall and broad and terrifying, with hard eyes and weapons on their hips. Kira Velshan, one of them said in a deep voice that made her bones vibrate, "You are required to report for duty immediately." "Please," Kira begged, her freckles flashing wildly. "There has been a terrible mistake. I am not a soldier. I am just a student. I pressed the wrong button." The two soldiers looked at each other, and for a moment, Kira thought she saw something like pity in their eyes. But then the taller one shook his head slowly. "Sorry, kid," he said in a slightly softer voice, "but the system does not care about mistakes. Once you are registered, you are registered. Now come with us or we have to arrest you." Kira had no choice. She grabbed a small bag, threw in a few personal items with shaking hands, and followed the soldiers out of the only home she had known for the past 2 years. As she walked through the academy gates for what might be the last time, she looked back at the beautiful crystal buildings and the peaceful gardens and the students, walking to their morning classes without a care in the universe. She had been one of them just yesterday. Now she was something else entirely. Now she was a volunteer in humanity's war, heading toward a ship called the Steadfast Fury, and she had never been more terrified in her entire young life. The shuttle ride to the orbital station took only 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Kira sat between the two soldiers, too scared to speak, too scared to move, too scared to do anything except stare at her trembling hands. When the shuttle doors opened and she saw the massive warship waiting for her in the docking bay, she felt her stomach drop. The Steadfast Fury was enormous, bristling with weapons, painted in dark gray and black, and it looked nothing like the elegant Valaxian vessels she had grown up seeing. This ship was not built for exploration or diplomacy. This ship was built for one thing only: war. And somehow, impossibly, Kira Velshan was about to become part of it. The inside of the Steadfast Fury was nothing like Kira had imagined. She had expected cold metal walls and harsh lighting and angry soldiers everywhere. But instead, she found something completely different. The corridors were loud with laughter and shouting, and music playing from somewhere deep in the ship. Humans walked past her in groups of 2 or 3, talking about things she did not understand, slapping each other on the back hard enough to make her wince. One of them bumped into her shoulder as he passed, and Kira stumbled sideways into the wall. The human turned around with wide eyes. "Oh man, sorry little one," he said quickly, reaching out to steady her with hands that were surprisingly gentle. "Did not see you there. You okay?" Kira nodded quickly, too shocked to speak. The human grinned at her, showing all of his teeth in what she had learned was a friendly gesture for his species, and then he continued on his way. The soldiers who had brought her from the academy led her through a maze of corridors until they reached the door marked Squad Bay 7, and then they left her there with nothing but a pat on the shoulder and a muttered, "Good luck, kid." Kira stood outside the door for a long time, trying to build up the courage to go inside. She could hear voices on the other side, loud and rough, and she was certain they would hate her the moment they saw her. Finally, she pressed the door panel and stepped inside. The room fell silent. 12 humans turned to look at her, and Kira felt like a small animal caught in a bright light. They were huge, every single one of them, with muscles and scars and eyes that had seen terrible things. A man at the center of the room stood up slowly. He was older than the others, with gray hair at his temples and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Scars crossed his cheek and jaw like a map of past battles, and his eyes were dark and unreadable. "You gotta be kidding me," he said in a voice like grinding rocks. Kira tried to speak, but only managed a small squeak. The man walked toward her, and she had to fight every instinct in her body not to run away. He stopped right in front of her and looked down at her small, trembling form. "I am Sergeant Marcus Cole," he said flatly, "and this is my squad." "Who the hell are you, and why are you in my bay?" Kira swallowed hard and forced herself to answer. "I am Kira Velshan," she whispered, "and I have been assigned to your unit. There was a mistake with the terminal, and I pressed the wrong button, and now I am here." Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to look at the other soldiers behind him. "Command sent me a Valaxian," he said in disbelief. "A Valaxian who pressed the wrong button." One of the soldiers, a woman with short dark hair and kind eyes, let out a laugh. "Well, Sarge," she said with a grin, "at least things will be interesting now." Marcus turned back to Kira with a heavy sigh. "You ever held a weapon, kid?" Kira shook her head. "You ever been in a fight?" "Any kind of fight?" Another shake. "You know anything about combat, tactics, survival, or literally anything useful in a war zone?" Kira felt tears building in her eyes, but she forced them back. "I know xenobiology," she said quietly, "and I can read 14 languages. Well, maybe not Terran so good, but still." Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose and let out a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a laugh. "Okay, Little Light," he said, using a nickname that would stick with her forever. "Here is the deal. Stick close to me, do exactly what I say, and try very hard not to die. Can you do that?" Kira nodded desperately. "Good. Now go find a bunk and get some rest. We deploy in 18 hours. The next 18 hours changed everything Kira thought she knew about humans. She had been taught that they were aggressive, dangerous, unpredictable creatures who solved every problem with violence. But the soldiers of Squad 7 were so much more than that. Private Elena Vasquez, the woman with kind eyes, found Kira sitting alone in the corner of the bay and sat down next to her. "You look scared," Elena said softly. "I am very scared," Kira admitted. Elena nodded like this was completely reasonable. "First deployment is always scary. But you know what? We look out for each other here. You are part of the squad now, which means we have your back." She spent the next 2 hours teaching Kira how to wrap her hands properly, how to check her equipment, and how to breathe slowly when panic started to set in. Corporal Jin Tanaka was a quiet man with clever eyes and gentle hands, and he took Kira around the ship to show her how everything worked. He explained the life support systems, the escape routes, the emergency protocols, and 100 other things that made Kira's head spin. "You are smart," Jin said as they walked back to the squad bay. "I can tell. Smart is good. Smart keeps you alive." Even the soldiers who did not speak to her directly treated her with unexpected kindness. They made room for her at the meal table. They lowered their voices when they saw her trying to sleep, and they never once made fun of her for being different. Private Derek Big D Williams, the largest human Kira had ever seen, noticed that she could not eat the standard ration bars without getting sick. He disappeared for an hour and came back with a box of special nutrient packs designed for Valaxian biology. "Found these in the medical bay," he said with a shy smile. "Should be easier on your stomach." Kira felt something warm spread through her chest, and she realized with surprise that it was not fear. It was gratitude. It was belonging. On her first night aboard the Steadfast Fury, Kira lay in her bunk and listened to the sounds of her new squad. Marcus was snoring loud enough to shake the walls. Elena was talking softly to Jin about her family back on Earth. Big D was reading something on his tablet, his lips moving silently as he followed the words. These humans were strange and loud and terrifying in so many ways. But they had also shown her more kindness in 18 hours than she had expected to find in a lifetime. She was still scared, more scared than she had ever been. But as she closed her eyes and felt the ship hum around her, Kira realized that she was not alone. And for now, that was enough. The planet Ashfall 7 was a nightmare made real. Kira stepped off the dropship and immediately felt the heat slam into her like a physical wall. The sky was orange and red, filled with smoke from 1,000 fires, and the ground beneath her feet was black volcanic rock that crunched with every step. Mountains in the distance spewed rivers of glowing lava, and the air tasted like metal and ash. "Welcome to paradise," Marcus said grimly as he checked his weapon. "Stay close and stay quiet." The squad moved in a tight formation through the ruined landscape, with Kira in the middle where she was most protected. She carried a small plasma pistol that Jin had given her, though she had only fired it 3 times in practice and missed the target every single time. Her hands were shaking so badly that she doubted she could hit anything, even if her life depended on it. And her life very much depended on it. The Krethvoll Dominion had invaded Ashfall 7 3 weeks ago, and the human colony here had been fighting for survival ever since. The mission was simple: reach the colony bunker, evacuate the survivors, and get back to the extraction point before nightfall. Simple, but not easy. The first sign of trouble came when Elena held up her fist, signaling the squad to stop. "Movement ahead," she whispered through the communication device in Kira's ear. 200 meters behind the rock formation. Everyone dropped to cover, and Kira pressed herself against a boulder that was almost too hot to touch. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was certain the enemy could hear it. Then she saw them, and her blood turned to ice. The Krethvoll were even more terrifying than the pictures she had seen. They moved on 8 legs like massive spiders, but their bodies were covered in black armored plates that gleamed like oil in the firelight. Their heads had no eyes that she could see, just clusters of sensory pits that allowed them to see heat and movement. Their mouths split into 4 mandibles lined with teeth as long as her fingers. There were at least 20 of them, maybe more, and they were between the squad and the colony bunker. "We go around," Marcus decided. "No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Move." They crept through the volcanic rocks for what felt like hours, moving slowly and carefully to avoid detection. Kira's legs ached and her lungs burned from the ash-filled air, but she did not complain. She would not be the reason this mission failed. They were almost past the Krethvoll patrol when everything went wrong. Big D stepped on a loose rock, and it tumbled down a small slope with a clatter that echoed across the hellish landscape. The Krethvoll turned as one, their sensory pits focusing on the source of the sound. "Contact!" Marcus roared. "Open fire!" The world exploded into chaos. Plasma bolts streaked through the air in both directions, painting the smoke with lines of green and blue. The humans moved with practiced precision, taking cover, firing, moving again. But the Krethvoll were fast and their armor was strong. Kira crouched behind a rock and watched in horror as the battle unfolded around her. She tried to aim her pistol, but her hands were shaking too badly. She tried to fire, but her finger would not move. A Krethvoll warrior fell with 3 plasma bolts in its chest, but 2 more took its place. Jin cried out in pain as a glancing shot burned across his arm. Big D picked him up and carried him to better cover, while Elena provided suppressing fire. Then Kira saw something that made her heart stop completely. Marcus had moved forward to draw enemy fire away from the wounded, but a Krethvoll scout had circled around behind him. The monster was creeping closer, its mandibles clicking with anticipation, and Marcus could not see it. Sergeant. Kira screamed, but her voice was lost in the thunder of weapons fire. She had to do something. She had to save him. But what could she do against a creature built for killing? She was small and weak and terrified. She was just a girl who had pressed the wrong button. The Krethful scout lunged toward Marcus with terrible speed, and something inside Kira broke loose. She did not think, did not plan, did not hesitate. She simply reacted. Every Velaxian carried a vestigial defense mechanism in their biology, a remnant from ancient times when her species had not yet become peaceful scholars. They could emit a concentrated flash of bioluminescent light from their skin, bright enough to blind predators. Her species had not used this ability in 9,000 years. Kira used it now. She screamed with everything in her soul, and her entire body erupted with light. It was not just bright, it was blinding. A supernova of violet-white radiance that turned the dark battlefield into pure white nothing. The Krethful scout shrieked in agony. Its sensory pits, evolved to detect heat and motion, were completely overloaded by the sudden burst of energy. It stumbled backward, its legs tangling together, its mandibles snapping at empty air. Elena did not hesitate. 2 plasma bolts punched through the scout's head, and it collapsed in a smoking heap. The other Krethful were equally disoriented, their hunting senses scrambled by the unexpected assault. "Fall back," Marcus ordered, grabbing his weapon and running. "Move, move, move." The squad ran, carrying Jin between them, with Kira stumbling along at the rear. Her skin was still flickering with dying light, and she felt exhausted in a way she had never experienced before. But they made it. They reached the colony bunker, evacuated the 37 survivors huddled inside, and fought their way back to the extraction point just as the sun began to set. On the transport ship heading back to the Steadfast Fury, Marcus sat down next to Kira. His arm was bandaged where shrapnel had caught him during the retreat, and his face was covered in soot and dry blood. But he was alive. "You saved my life back there, little light," he said quietly. Kira shook her head weakly. "I did not know I could do that," she admitted. "I just saw the monster behind you, and I was so scared, and then the light happened." Marcus looked at her for a long moment with an expression she could not read. Then he did something that shocked her. He smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible beneath the grime and scars, but it was real. "Welcome to Squad 7, kid," he said. "You earned your place today." And for the first time since she had pressed that wrong button, Kira felt like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. 3 months had passed since Ashfall Day, and Kira Velshan was no longer the trembling girl who had pressed the wrong button. She had fought in 7 engagements alongside Squad 7. She had learned to shoot her plasma pistol with decent accuracy. She had memorized human battle tactics, emergency medical procedures, and the words to 17 Terran war songs. Her flash ability, once a forgotten relic of her species, had become a weapon that the Krethful had learned to fear. But nothing could have prepared her for Relay Station Omicron. The station floated in the darkness of space, a massive structure of metal and glass that controlled communications across an entire sector. If it fell to the Krethful, 3 human colony worlds would be cut off from the rest of the fleet. Millions of people would die. The mission briefing was short and brutal. "We hold this station for 72 hours, the commanding officer said grimly. "Reinforcements are on the way, but they cannot arrive sooner. There are 41 of us, and intelligence suggests at least 3,000 Krethful are en route. This is not going to be easy." Kira looked around the briefing room at the faces she had come to love. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, his expression hard as stone. Elena was checking her weapon for the 100th time. Jin was tapping his fingers nervously against his leg. Big D was praying quietly under his breath. 41 soldiers against 3,000 monsters. The odds were impossible, but not a single human in that room suggested retreating. "We hold," Marcus said simply, and that was the end of the discussion. The first wave came 6 hours later. Crethvold drop pods slammed into the station's outer hull, and the nightmare began. Kira fought alongside her squad in the eastern corridor, using her flash to blind enemies while the humans cut them down with plasma fire. The station shook with explosions. The lights flickered and died and came back on. The air filled with smoke and the screams of the wounded and the clicking of Crethvold mandibles. When the first wave finally broke, 12 defenders were dead and many more were injured. The second wave came 4 hours after that, and this time the Crethvold breached the western sector. Kira ran through burning corridors with Jin at her side, carrying medical supplies to soldiers who had been cut off from the main group. She used her flash 3 more times, each burst leaving her weaker than the last, but she refused to stop. By the end of the second day, only 28 defenders remained. The power grid was failing, the communication systems were damaged, and ammunition was running dangerously low. Marcus gathered everyone in the central command room for a brief rest. "I am not going to lie to you," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Things look bad. Reinforcements are still 30 hours away, and we have lost almost half our people. But we are still standing, and as long as we are standing, this station does not fall." A soldier in the back raised her hand. "Sarge, communications are down. The fleet does not even know we are still alive. What if they think the station already fell?" A heavy silence filled the room. If the fleet thought the station was lost, they might redirect the reinforcements elsewhere. They might leave the defenders to die. Kira's mind raced. She thought about her xenobiology classes, about the research she had done on bioelectric organisms, about the principles of energy transfer and signal amplification. "I can fix it," she said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. "What did you say, little light?" Marcus asked. Kira stood up, her freckles glowing with determination. "The communication relay is broken, yes, but I learned about bioelectric organisms in my studies. If I can find the right components, I can build a signal booster using similar principles. It will not be pretty, but it should work long enough to send a message to the fleet." The humans stared at her in amazement. "Can you really do that?" Elena asked. Kira nodded firmly. "I think so. I need access to the medical bay for biological compounds, the engineering section for power cells, and about 2 hours of uninterrupted work." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled that small, rare smile she had come to treasure. "You heard her," he said to the squad. "Get little light whatever she needs." The next 2 hours were the longest of Kira's life. She worked furiously in a small maintenance room, surrounded by parts and wires and glowing biological compounds. Outside, she could hear the sounds of fighting as the third wave of Crethvold attacked. Her hands moved faster, driven by fear and hope and desperate determination. The station shook violently, and something exploded nearby. Jin appeared in the doorway, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. "How much longer?" He shouted over the noise. "Almost done," Kira screamed back. She connected the last wire, held her breath, and pressed the activation switch. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the makeshift device hummed to life, glowing with soft blue light. "It works!" Kira cried out. She grabbed the communication terminal and sent a desperate message. "This is Relay Station Omicron. We are still holding. 41. Defenders now reduced to 19. Request immediate reinforcement. Coordinates follow." A crackle of static. Then a voice came through, distant but clear. "Omicron, this is Battlefleet Tempest. Message received. We are rerouting reinforcements to your position. Hold for 24 more hours. Help is coming. Kira felt tears streaming down her face. She ran back to the command room where the surviving defenders were making their last stand. I got through, she shouted. They are coming. We just have to hold for one more day. A ragged cheer went up from the exhausted soldiers. The final 24 hours were pure hell. The Krethval attacked in waves, endless waves, and the defenders fell back inch by inch. Kira used her flash until she could barely stand, until her freckles flickered like dying embers, until her vision blurred with exhaustion. When the station's main lights failed completely, she guided wounded soldiers through the pitch-black corridors using her species' natural low-light vision. When a Krethval broke through into the medical bay, she stabbed it in its sensory cluster with a surgical tool while Big D finished it off. When Marcus took a hit to his leg and could not walk, she helped Elena drag him to safety. The dawn of the third day came with the roar of engines and the thunder of heavy weapons. Reinforcements had arrived. Battlefleet Tempest descended on the Krethval like a storm of fire and steel, driving them back, destroying their ships, breaking their assault. When the all-clear signal finally sounded, Kira was sitting on the floor of the command room, surrounded by the 19 survivors of the siege. They had done it. Against impossible odds. They had held. Marcus limped over and sat down next to her with a heavy groan. You know something, little light? He said quietly. What? Kira asked, too tired to even open her eyes. That signal booster you built saved 3 colony worlds today. Millions of people are alive because of you. Kira thought about this for a moment. She thought about the frightened girl who had pressed the wrong button so many months ago. She thought about how far she had come and everything she had survived. I think I finally understand why humans fight so hard, she said softly. Oh yeah? Why is that? Kira smiled. Because you do not fight for yourselves. You fight for each other. For strangers you have never met. For people who will never even know your names. And that is the most beautiful and terrifying thing I have ever seen. Marcus laughed. A real laugh that shook his whole body. Welcome to humanity, kid, he said. You are one of us now. The war ended 6 months after the siege of Relay Station Omicron. The Krethval Dominion, broken by human determination and the unexpected alliances they had formed, signed an unconditional surrender in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Union. It was the greatest victory in 100 years, and the entire galaxy celebrated. But for Kira Velshan, the celebration felt strange and distant. She stood in front of a mirror in a small dressing room, staring at her reflection with disbelief. The lavender-skinned girl looking back at her wore the crisp black dress uniform of the Human Expeditionary Force, complete with a service ribbon and unit patches. She looked like a soldier. She looked like a hero. She did not feel like either. A knock came at the door, and Elena poked her head inside. You ready, little light? The ceremony is about to start. Kira took a deep breath and nodded. I do not understand why they are making such a big deal about this, she said nervously. I just did what anyone would have done. Elena laughed and stepped into the room. Girl, you saved a relay station with a device made from medical supplies and engine parts. You guided wounded soldiers through pitch-black corridors while Krethval were hunting them. You stabbed one of those monsters with a surgical knife. That is not what anyone would have done. But I was so scared the whole time, Kira protested. Elena put her hands on Kira's shoulders and looked her directly in the eyes. That is exactly the point. Being brave does not mean being fearless. Being brave means being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. And you did that over and over again for 3 days straight. Kira felt tears prickling at her eyes, but she blinked them away. Thank you, Elena, she whispered. Thank me later. Right now, you have 10,000 people waiting to give you a medal. The Grand Assembly Hall was the largest room Kira had ever seen. Massive columns of white stone rose toward a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Floating platforms carried diplomats and journalists from across the galaxy. Holographic displays showed her face on screens the size of buildings. 10,000 beings from 100 different species filled the hall, and every single one of them was there to see her. Kira walked down the central aisle on legs that threatened to give out with every step. Marcus walked on her left, his legs still bandaged but his stride strong. Jin walked on her right, his arm in a sling but his smile wide. Elena and Big D and the other survivors of Squad 7 followed behind, their uniforms gleaming in the ceremonial lights. At the end of the aisle stood a raised platform where the most important leaders of the Galactic Union had gathered. Human generals in decorated uniforms. Valaxian elders in flowing robes. Representatives from dozens of species who had joined the alliance against the Krethful. And in the center of them all stood Admiral Yuki Tanaka, the supreme commander of the Human Expeditionary Force. She was a small woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen 1,000 battles, and she watched Kira approach with an expression of deep respect. Kira climbed the steps to the platform and stood before the Admiral. Her heart was pounding so hard, she was certain everyone could hear it. Admiral Tanaka smiled warmly. Kira Velshan of Valaxia Prime, she said in a voice that carried throughout the massive hall, "You came to us by accident. You arrived as a frightened student who did not even speak our language well. You had never held a weapon, never been in a fight, never known war or death or the terrible cost of battle." The Admiral paused, and the silence in the hall was absolute. "But you became something more. Through courage, through sacrifice, through the strength of a spirit that refused to break, you became a soldier. You became a hero. You became one of us." She lifted a small black case from the podium beside her and opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a golden medal shaped like a sunburst. "The Terran Solar Cross," Admiral Tanaka announced, "is humanity's highest military honor. It is given only to those who show extraordinary valor in the face of overwhelming odds. In the entire history of this award, it has never been given to someone who was not born human." She lifted the medal from its case. "Today, that changes." Admiral Tanaka stepped forward and pinned the medal to Kira's chest. "For courage beyond measure. For leadership that saved countless lives. For proving that the heart of a hero knows no species. The Human Expeditionary Force is proud to claim Kira Velshan as one of our own." The hall erupted. Humans rose to their feet, roaring and stomping and chanting her name. Valaxian diplomats wept openly, their freckles blazing with emotion. Species that had never agreed on anything before stood together in applause. Kira stood frozen in the center of it all, overwhelmed by the sound and the light and the impossible reality of what was happening. Then she saw her squad. Marcus was cheering louder than anyone, his scarred face split by the biggest smile she had ever seen. Elena was jumping up and down like a child. Jin was wiping tears from his eyes. Big D was on his knees, sobbing with joy. These were her people now. This loud, strange, terrifying, beautiful species had taken her in and made her family. After the ceremony, a journalist pushed through the crowd to reach her. "Miss Velshan," he called out, "the whole galaxy wants to know. Do you regret pressing that button?" Kira looked at the golden medal on her chest. She looked at the squad of humans who had become her family. She looked at the thousands of faces watching her, waiting for her answer. She thought about the girl she had been, crying alone in the library, terrified of a mistake she could not undo. She thought about everything that had happened since then. The fear and the pain and the loss. The friendship and the courage and the love. She smiled, and her freckles glowed softly with warmth. "It was the best mistake I ever made," she said. The crowd roared again, and somewhere in the chaos, Marcus caught her eye and gave her a small nod of approval. Later that night, long after the ceremony had ended and the crowds had gone home, Kira sat alone on a balcony overlooking the glittering lights of the Union Capitol. She was still wearing her uniform, still wearing her medal, still trying to process everything that had happened. Footsteps approached, and Marcus sat down beside her. They did not speak for a long time. Finally, Kira broke the silence. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Marcus shrugged. "War is over. You can go back to the academy, finish your studies, become that professor you always wanted to be. You have earned it." Kira considered this. She thought about her old life, about xenobiology classes and quiet libraries and peaceful dreams. It felt like remembering a stranger. "And if I do not want to go back?" she asked. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Kira turned to look at him. "The universe is still full of people who need help. There are still colonies that need protecting, refugees who need rescuing, battles that need fighting. I am not the same girl who pressed that button anymore. I have found something worth fighting for." Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled that small, rare smile she had come to treasure. "You know," he said slowly, "Squad 7 has an opening. Lost a lot of good people in this war. Could use someone with your skills, your brains, your absolutely ridiculous light show." Kira felt her heart lift. "Are you offering me a permanent position, Sergeant Cole?" "I am offering you a family, little light. Same thing as far as I am concerned." Kira reached out and took his hand. "Then I accept." Above them, the stars stretched out into infinity, full of danger and wonder and endless possibility. Somewhere out there, new adventures were waiting. And Kira Velshan, the girl who had pressed the wrong button and accidentally became a legend, was ready to meet them. Together with her human family, she would face whatever came next. Because that was what heroes did. That was what family did. And that was the most human thing of all.